to.
That's awesome.
There we go.
Awesome.
Yeah, it does. I'd never done guest podcasts before. And so I figured this is just how I wanted to do it.
I love that. I need to get there in the near future. I think I'm not even sure if I've decided that I'm going to start with actual video, because I've seen people just do, audio podcasts.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's all I have time for right now. But you talk to the big gurus and they're like, no, you actually really need to do all the avenues. And for me, it's like, I just have to get started.
Actually, you only need to do what you feel right doing and what feels aligned with you. If you think of the big gurus, they have an entire team behind them and they spend how many hours a month actually on that stuff. And then they have a team that does everything to make sure they show up everywhere.
That is very true.
I tell people you only need to do what feels aligned to you and get started doing that and grow into where you want to grow. Because I feel like when it comes to being everywhere in all the ways, that's more for when you get to a level that you're making those 7 figures and you have a team behind you and they can do all of that. So no one's like killing themselves over it.
Yes, because that's how it looks through the binoculars when you're looking at all of it. It looks like that just might take me out, actually.
But Gary Vee has paid someone 6 figures a year to follow him around to get B-roll all year long, to videotape everything. So he always has his stuff on video so they can take that and use that content. So,
oh my gosh.
I always say nowadays, I didn't used to say this, but I do now after really taking some time to reflect, because I reflect every year about how I'm moving forward, is the best way to lower your stress level is to take everything off your plate that you feel obligated to do that you don't want to do.
Whoa.
Take everything off your table that is not serving the direction you and your family are going. And then take everything off the table that is not serving the direction you are going in your business and your faith.
So amazing.
And then you only focus on the things that serve you well and that allow you to serve well.
You could do a year-long course with that. Maybe you already do. I don't know.
Actually have a podcast called Put Down the Plates. So you could go check it out. And it's all about how to put down the plates and how to better set your table so you can show up intentionally 100% to all the things so that you're not feeling pulled in 50 million different directions. It's probably it's my most requested podcast, but my most listened to podcast, which I think is so funny, is my Willing To series. And that is all about what you have to be willing to do in order to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
I think that those are the ones that I get stuck on. I get stuck on that without taking in the Put Down the Plates one. I forget to listen to the Put Down the Plates one, and I listen to the other one, and then I'm going on this thing. And it's almost like strength and truth. You can't have them separate from each other.
Yeah.
They actually have to be aligned. Otherwise, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't balance out in the end, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm incorporating all of that into my cohort that I'm launching. My membership is the Business Blueprint Academy. And I'm walking entrepreneurs through creating their signature business blueprints for what works for them, and incorporating the life and faith and how it functions with everything together. So that'll be a place where you come together with 12 or, up to 12 people in a cohort, and we walk through it for a year.
That is so.
You build it out, deal with the struggles, you get the mastermind kind of aspect of it. And it really supports you in, like you said, the gurus say, well, but does that serve you? And where are you at that you feel supported to do what you need to be doing? And where do you go to help dig through the weeds to figure out what that is? And where do you go to get that support? And so, yeah.
I think that's why a lot of people quit, because the online space can be very lonely for one. And if you have all of those things that you're like, all of the things, I need to do this, and you look at the stack and you're like, I am not going to get through that in 20 years if I go in that direction. So that's, that is so needed. So needed.
Yeah.
It's really good.
It's a good conversation. I'm working really hard right now to refrain from just sharing all the things because I get so excited. I'm so excited to talk about it. I can't even say the word excited. I sound like a little kid. I'm excited.
Yes, I'm so excited. Yeah, that's cute.
Oh, that's too funny.
Good. Very good.
So, we'll go ahead and hop in then to the podcast.
You bet.
And I'll do an introduction and then I'll have you do your own introduction. And then we'll kind of dive into things.
Okay. That sounds awesome.
Cool. How do you pronounce your last name?
Fehr.
Okay. I just
want
like
a state fair. Yeah. It looks like fear or fur, but I get all of that. Yes, it's fair.
Awesome. I just, you never know anymore these days. You can literally spell it exactly how it sounds and it could still be a different sounding word. So you never know.
Some friends of ours, I never actually heard them say their last name, and they're not from here, so we don't see them often, but we see them a few times a year. I thought that their last name was a Stafforoff. And it's not a Stafforoff. It was a Astaforoff. And I was like, ooh, like it totally changed how my brain was thinking. I was like, that doesn't sound right. Here I've done this the whole time, 7 years. I thought it was something different.
You're like, are you sure that's your name? Because, I thought it was this. So can we just leave it that way?
That is exactly, because they were standing up speaking in church on their online video thing on Sunday morning. And I was like, no, you guys have it wrong. Because this is what I think.
I think it's this. I'm just going to stay here.
Exactly. I'll have to call them by their name. I'll just say it when they're not around.
Right? Oh, that's funny. Alrighty. So we have, almost a whole hour. So you can share as much or as little of your story as you want to when we get into that. And yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
That's good. Yeah. Great.
Alrighty, let's go. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Walking With You podcast. I am your host, Dina Adams, and today I am speaking with Cynthia Fehr and have invited her into this space because when I first met Cynthia, we actually met because we're going through an academy together and learning some things. And as we got to talking about things completely off topic, it's so easy to do. I just realized that her story is so powerful and so needed. And she has such a kindness about her. And I just felt her coming in to share about this one specific topic of parenting. Her story, everything that they've gone through to where she is now, what she's doing in business, how she's serving, how she's helping is so needed because I think too often we're always trying to do what other parents tell us to do instead of learning how to do for what works for our family. And I really feel that Cynthia has a beautiful story to share. And I'm hoping that you find some aha moments in here, find a few moments of, I feel freed from that. So I really feel like that's coming in this conversation. So Cynthia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dina, for having me. This is exciting to come and join you today.
Yes, absolutely. So Cynthia, why don't you share with us what you are, what you do, who you serve in your business?
Awesome. Yes. Well, sometimes I think as women, first and foremost, we want to say, I'm a mom. Seeing as how we're talking about parenting, that is, it fits really well. But, Cynthia, all on her own, is a bird watcher. She is a wanderer. I love to be by myself in nature, and I love quiet coffees with friends and that type of thing. I love spending time with my husband. But in the wild world of motherhood, that seems to overtake about 99% of who I am. So 1% of Cynthia is that other thing. The rest of me is a mom. And, we always wonder if we'll ever get out of that stage of, Mom, can you come and wipe? It doesn't, you don't think it's going to end. And then they hit nearly 19 and nearly 16, and you wonder where the time went. So somebody always told me those were the longest days, but the shortest years. And that's very true when you're right in the middle of it. My firstborn was fairly typical, wasn't a good sleeper, was a very long nurser. So he really made it fairly easy to adjust into motherhood. And I didn't actually know that I was pregnant when I got a call from my sister saying the alarming news that a genetic, I'll call it a disorder, even though I don't actually like that term, but it is considered a genetic disorder on the DNA that all of my sisters and most of my family carry. It's called Fragile X syndrome. And, you sort of fall to your knees with that sort of information when that comes down the pipe, because when it's a genetic condition, you go, oh, maybe I should start family planning, because we had been family planning up until that point. We had lost 2 babies and by miscarriage. And so we were just thinking, like, we got to get on this because, it's time. If we don't do it now, we might not do it again. And so we stopped everything. We're just like, okay, let's put that on hold. And a week later, I found out that I was already pregnant upon deciding that, because we knew we'd have to go through genetic testing for myself to see exactly how this was going to transpire in history ahead. And so that pregnancy was somewhat daunting, because there was a large percentage chance that my child would also be born either as a premutation carrier or as full Fragile X syndrome child. And, he seemed just atypical in the first 4 weeks. And then he started screaming at about the 5th and 6th week. Everything upset him. It didn't matter what it was. But when he was happy, he was super happy. And then he just would scream and we couldn't console him. And that lasted until he was nearly 7 years old. It was massive eruptions lasting for hours at a time. And so you feel as though you sort of had a handle on raising kids and being a mom. And then all of a sudden you don't. And the typical idea is that you are going to be able to console your child. You're going to be able to comfort your child. You're going to be able to hold your child. If your child is crying, who's better than mom? It's like, oh, give him to mom. She'll be able to do it. And a lot of times I couldn't. Even I couldn't console him. And so even as he got older and, he's running around and doing his thing, he was about 2.5, and right in the middle of a meltdown out in the front yard at our new little village that we had moved to, he has this massive, massive alligator tears streaming down his face. And I'm ready to collapse, right? Because this was like probably the 6th time that day. And I felt as though God whispered to me and said, Cynthia, there's a brilliance inside this child, but you're going to have to go find it. And so I've got these huge blue eyes, blinking at me. And I'm like, I'm not equipped for this. Like there's no instructions that come with a child. There's no instructions, it seems, that come within yourself as a mom. And all the years, what just kept screaming inside of me was, what mom can't help her child? And my answer was, I couldn't. And so we went through another big move to a different province completely. And so we just kept muddling through all of these things, every upset that he would have. Now, here's the funny part about it, or not funny, is that other people weren't seeing this. So very few of my family members would ever see this. The teachers at school had no idea. All they knew was that he was getting his work done really fast, and he would hand it in, and they just couldn't keep up with, even his learning. They would be moving him to the class ahead of him to go and teach like math in front of the class. And yet at home, he had such a hard time. So he would hold it all together at school, and then he would come down and collapse. And I mean, there's all sorts of diagnoses that are around, nowadays, and our doctor did her best. And to get to as clear as what she could, but it still didn't match anything out there. So she's like, I'm not sure what kind of help you're going to find. And there was very little help indeed. OTs didn't know what to do. They sat with us and they're like, oh my goodness, Cynthia, you're teaching me stuff. And I've been an OT for 25 years. We'd go to psychologists and they'd be like, that's actually as far as I can take you. I'm so sorry. If your son won't sit with us, there's really nothing more I can do for you. I really don't know how to help you because this isn't something that I've seen. And it wasn't until he was closer to 8, 9 years old when more revelation came as to what we really needed to be doing with him. Yeah.
That is so overwhelming to me. Having 5 kids.
Yeah.
They're all adults now. Our youngest, they're all adults. And so I know for me, hearing a child cry and scream and not being able to console them is heart-wrenching. Yet knowing, like, having something to that extent where no one can help is unfathomable to me.
It would take hours sometimes to get him down from his outbursts, and sometimes, a lot of times they were very physical. I have been spit in the face in public. I have been slapped in the face in public. I've had him jump out of a moving van when we were backing out to take them to school because he was desperate to stay home. And we have done the same thing as what any other parent would do. You pick them up like a sack of potatoes and it's like, it is your job. You are going to school. And we would get there and we would be bleeding and bruised by the time we got there. And so his little world was just in utter chaos. And, when you don't know what you're dealing with and you don't have anyone else who has a clue as to what you're dealing with because they're not seeing this, teachers were still at this point not quite grasping. It's not that they were in unbelief. They did believe us that something was not really working and that he did have his challenges. But nobody could see the triggers. It took me a long time to understand the triggers. And all of this sounds like commonplace language. And yet, when you're in the middle of it, it was like we were watching a child with extreme PTSD, like he had been to war or somebody had really badly hurt him. And we were not those parents at all. Like there wasn't spanking in our house because it simply didn't work. We tried a few times where it's like, we got to try something. We don't know what to try anymore. Like you're at your wit's end and you're just, and one of the school counselors actually encouraged us to lay him down on the floor. So I would literally like karate chop his legs from underneath him. I would lay him on the floor and I would cross his arms like this and hold him down. And I wish I could actually just yell as loud as he did to give you all the full effect, but it was, it's not working. It's not working. Like he just huge tears. So now this kid we've moved into a place where he doesn't even feel safe with me. So I couldn't console him before. He doesn't want to be touched. And then I put him in a place where now I'm still bigger than him, so I can physically restrain him, but I've just crossed the line. Because that cry that came out of him was really one of the first times that I heard him express, what you're doing, Mom, isn't working. I need your help. Can we try something else? He doesn't have the words to say that, but in that moment, that's what I'm hearing. And I was like, but God, I don't even know. Like, what do you try at that point? Because when he was alive and had joy and he was like in the moment, he was so funny. He was the funniest kid. And we would just soak up those moments. He was a good sleeper, all of those things. He thoroughly enjoyed play. He's a Lego dude. Played very quietly most of the time, but when he got disrupted, look out. And then I've written stories and poetry about it because in those moments, it's like, I can't forget this. I have to actually write this down to describe what this is like in the moment because it was like nothing else I'd ever seen or experienced.
So how does this journey tie into how you help others? Do you help others based on going through the same thing, or what is it that you are doing that brings all this to where you are now? And then I'll dive back into your story some more because I have questions.
Definitely. Yes, it came not entirely by accident. My first go being online was just to write because I was continually writing at that time, journaling everything. So I have like journals stacked just straight up here of that whole lifetime experience with him. But that sort of led to, even just products that we couldn't use in the home because, different conferences and stuff with the Fragile X that I would go to, they said, beware of like any kind of cleaners and toxins and different kinds of medications and, use medication if you need to. It wasn't like they were against it, but they were very careful as to what to use because the simple view of it is just that there's those connectors, the synapses in the brain, and they don't quite connect when there's junk in between. So if there's junk that gets inside of here, these don't fire correctly. I mean, it's no different than when you charge your phone. You got to almost give those little pieces a rub and a clean every now and again so that they can engage. And that's the same thing that happens in the brain. And sometimes those toxins can cross that blood-brain barrier. And with children like this, it really can affect them. So I was going through using, like eliminating fabric softener, any kind of scent in their homes and yada, yada. And so I was starting to share that and blog about that online to where when I was getting a gal to help me with my website, she's like, you need to make this into a course. I was like, I don't even know what a course is. I just don't know. That wasn't a big thing online at that time. But as I went along trying to develop that, it started to turn more into, oh, these people need help directly. And they have questions because I started to get, messages and emails. It's like, well, what did you do? And even the psychologists, when we weren't getting any answers from them, they were wondering, what did you do? Our doctor, what did you do? Like, because she saw us go from not having a clue to, oh my goodness, like your child just did a 180. Like he's not the same kid. And she's like, do you have any idea when I go into my conferences, all the doctors I tell about your story because it was such a miraculous one that they've never seen this go from that crazy to this package of a young man. So yeah, her and I are still in contact and hoping to speak together here coming up this year. But yeah, I now really want to be that place where parents can come in, because they're not the habit, it's the default. We hide. We go into a closed place because it's not always safe to share all this. Because you'll get parents that'll say to you, "Oh yeah, my kid does that all the time." And I'm like, "Say what? No, you're not understanding what's going on here." And then you'll get somebody else, "He'll grow out of it." And I'm like, "Okay, now I'm getting more mad." I need a sounding board, but you have to be careful who you're a sounding board to, like, or who you use as your sounding board. All of a sudden you realize, oh, you mean this isn't safe to share with just any parent. It's no different than, a secret. It's not that your family and your child should be a secret and that you should hide. It's just a very precious package that you have to guard and say, when it's safe, I will let it out. But that didn't exist for me. So I decided I am going to be that place so that parents can come and go, "Oh, I'm not alone. Oh my goodness, she knows what it's like to be on an island, just like me."
Oh, that's so incredible. I love how earlier you mentioned that God said to find the greatness in Him. And you said, "I'm not equipped." And I think of that because so often we believe that in order to do something, we have to be equipped before we answer the call.
Yeah.
And this happens so often that when you say yes to the calling, then you get equipped along the way. And this is a perfect example of how God does that. Because if you would have found this out before you found out you were pregnant, right? You guys would have stopped trying. You would have been like, "Oh, let's shift, let's adjust. Now we got to rethink everything." And God was like, "I have a bigger plan."
Yep. Yes, that's very true. That's
So
very true.
I would love to hear you share a little bit about what it is briefly that you did, or what the awareness was, or what you were finally equipped with to, one, help him, and to two, if you've been able to find out what that greatness was in him that you felt God was guiding you to find. Because sometimes, even though God tells us and we try to find it, it doesn't always happen. And it could be years down the road before that ever comes to light. So I was just interested in what that journey has looked like.
Yes. I will do spoiler right now in saying we are sequences of it. He's almost 16, and the brilliance and the purpose and all of that is still unfolding. The behaviors and the violence is all but gone away. His moments of struggling to deal with certain things has not gone away. But what I will tell you is that it is actually never them that change. It's you. All the things that you said, I can't, you will do 1,000 times over, 1,000 times over, and 1,000 times over, and you will wonder if there's ever an end. And I now believe that at the time I didn't understand what an overcomer was, because I very, very clearly remember the times when he was so incredibly violent, writhing on the floor And my husband and I are like, this cannot happen anymore. Like, you need to understand this behavior is not okay. You cannot pound on your brother. You cannot poke the dog in the kennel. You can't, like, I mean, little things. And it would just be like massive landmine would just, and then we get escalated because you stay calm as you can be until all of a sudden it's like, I can't deal with this anymore. So I don't ever want parents to hear that it's like, oh, there was a revelation and I got it. And it was like, oh, everything turned right after that point. Lots turned at that point. But I am a human being and there is only so much tolerance that a person has. And that is the journey. And unless you decide at one point that you are going to walk this journey and I'm going to stay in the game today, you have to decide that every single time that child melts down. You have to decide it every morning when you put your feet on the floor that I am going to stay in the game today. It does not mean that you will fail. All of those failures will add up to, oh, I know what I'm doing now. So to me, I'm like, I don't write any of that off. Those books that I have up there of all the things that I did wrong add up to what we eventually learned how to do. Is it right? I don't like to call things right. It's what works for your child. And that's based on connection. So when you get to the place where it's like, okay, my child's not feeling safe with me. I don't know why. I don't understand that part, but I'm going to choose to not be offended. I'm going to choose that this isn't about me. I'm going to choose that his heart and my heart need a rope tied together that does not get severed by me. And I now have to teach him to not sever that from him to me either. And that was the game changer right there, was when I chose, it's like, okay, you and me, kid. I would go like this with him. And he didn't like eye contact, didn't want to look at me. I was like, I didn't force that. I just said, I need you to hear me. My heart is connected to yours, and I am here no matter what's happening. No matter what behavior is going to come today, I'm right here. He did not believe that at first. He didn't want to know anything about that at first. And so that was the choosing. I decide today. And then over time, as he saw that I wasn't going anywhere and that nothing could shift me, it was like, oh, that's when the calm started to come. And then the calm started to come more and more and more and more, because he was like, oh, that's how she does it. And that feels way better. And then he was able to learn more self-regulating on his own, just with me being present with him.
So and I feel like this is exactly what you just said, I was going to ask the question of how do you keep going when your circumstances don't change? And to hear you say it's a choice. And I think this is the piece people miss all the time, is you get a choice every second of every day, how you're going to show up. And you're right. We're human. We are not perfect, and we will not ever be perfect. And we can only ever strive to just be our best with where we are in any given moment.
Yep.
And to continue to work towards figuring out a way to connect. I think that is such a huge thing. It doesn't matter if your child has or doesn't have any kind of whatever going on. That connection is so important. And for those of us that already raised our kids, that couldn't figure out how to connect with our kids, and you're still trying to figure out when they're adults, like, there's still opportunity for that, because there's still opportunity to say, regardless, I'm going to choose to not get offended.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that we have control over that we don't choose to control, and a lot of things we don't have control over that we try to control. And I feel like that vicious cycle right there is what causes more division inside of our households than anything. And so, but if I don't know if that was your answer to this question, but when your circumstances don't change, is that your response that you have to? Or is there more to it?
That's a huge part of it, because when do you quit being mom? You don't quit. And in actual fact, you don't want to. Inside of you, you're screaming. It's like, I can't do this one more day. I can't do this another second. I'm going back to bed. I am pulling the covers over. And I did that. I did that often. And, even to go to bed, if he wasn't settled, good luck. He would come into our room and run from the one wall and ram himself into our mattress so that the entire room would shake. And now looking back, sometimes I would get so angry because I'm like, dude, I am so tired. Like, you have no idea. I have been exhausted. You've had about 10 of these today already. I need to go to bed. And my husband is exhausted because we've already tag teamed. It's great when there's two parents, but there's only two. And brother can't help. Brother's sleeping. And nor should he be, a part of that necessarily. So yeah, he would ram our bed. He would come and he would jump. And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm not sure if you and I are going to be alive tomorrow. I think we might not be here tomorrow. So you have those thoughts, and then there's fear of, oh my goodness, if my child gets bigger and stronger, what is going to happen? Like, the law is going to take over, because if they saw my bruises and they saw what he did to me, and he is 16, he's going to be in very big trouble. And so that's our fear. And sometimes I think we feed those fears by like, it's getting worse. It's getting worse. Whereas if you take a step back and go, there has to be a root to this. What is going on inside of him that he is feeling so much pain over, and he doesn't feel control? And then on the outside, it looks that he's wanting to control. But it's actually, if you think about that for a second, what he's doing on the outside looks as though he's desiring control. He's going to push for it. He's going to force it. He's behaving in such a way that's like, if you don't give me the control, I'm going to continue in this behavior. What I learned was how to decode that and hear what he was not saying and what he was not doing. If he's vying for control, that's the very thing that he's struggling to do for himself. So how do I do that as a parent without controlling him? I have to teach him how to self-govern. And you have to learn how to do that at 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and beyond, because every stage is different. And when we started to do that, so many things changed. Now, you have to remember that this child would also go nonverbal during these explosive outbursts. How do you teach a child to self-govern when they can't talk to you and they can't hear you because their prefrontal cortex is like, don't talk to me, or it's shut down, or, whatever's happening in those moments. And as simple as it sounds, we went back to play. We went back to play every time. And we came up with very creative games that were specific for our son. And that is what I want so many parents to grasp, is that you will not learn these things with an expert. No expert can tell you what that looks like for your family and for your child and for you, because they're not you. And that's where it's like the instructions that you think actually aren't there are there inside of them, and they're there inside of you. And it's all about hearing, and it's actually turning this off. When you shut that off, this, and this come alive. And when you can't touch, all of the other things, because if he didn't want to be touched, we couldn't touch. So then all of the other things start to come alive. You can use your body in so many amazing ways to have them respond to you that will change and shift gears in their brain. And then you have their attention. And you can bring them back from that 60 or the shutdown to that middle ground, to where at least you can leave the place that you're at where he is exploding or she's having a rough time, and then get to safety. Or you might get them to a place where they're good to go and run and play with the kids again. Sometimes we had to leave and that was okay. At least if we got him out of the shutdown or down from the meltdown, and we could remove from the situation so we could both go get some rest somewhere.
It just makes me realize, I'm not good at shutting this at all. Still, I try so hard. I do. I am a verbal processor just in that in itself.
Me too.
Right. And I struggled for so many years thinking that I had to explain to such a level that I got agreement, because I understood agreement as understanding. So it really put such a strain and stress and trauma on my relationship with our kids, because all they wanted me to do was hear them, respect where they were, let them make their mistakes, all those things. And all I wanted to do was, in my own way, I wanted to hear them, but I never knew how to do that. I never learned what that looked like. And so I did my best. So to me, that was always saying what I heard in a way that let them know I understood. But to them, the way I verbalized what I heard was always wrong. So they always felt like I had no clue. Mom doesn't get it. And she's trying to do this and she's trying to do that. Because I don't verbalize things well either in the way I mean them, right? I can say something, like, is that a question? Is that a statement? Are you mad? Is this like, and they're like, we don't know what's going on. Okay. And we're adults now. And I'm like, I'm still figuring it out. But it's so true that we have to be so aware of ourselves. And if we are the common denominator, right? We are the one that is raising them and showing them how to thrive in life.
Yeah.
We have to figure out how to be of support to them, not someone controlling them. And when you're raised in an environment where everything is about control, and so you don't know that, it makes it really hard to believe that changing that is not giving them control and you now feeling like a child.
No, absolutely not. So true, Dina. Yes.
So there's something that you said that I just want to touch on. Is you said every stage is different. We had to teach them at 2 and a 3 and a 4. And I think one of the challenges is we go into parenthood, planned or not, intended or not, with what we think parenting should or does look like based on past belief and the belief that we currently carry.
Yes.
And when we do that, we forget to grow our parenting skills with our kids' growth.
Yeah. Nailed it. Sorry, go ahead, Dina.
I was just going to ask a question. You're fine. Go ahead.
I did want to say, I've learned should is a swear word. Should is a shame word. Because that's, yeah. And even just thinking about shame in that, if we carry shame, and often shame is tied to the tongue, at least from my growing up and what my first reactions were as a parent. And when I figured out that my frustration with him, because I was so frustrated, I'm not saying that that's wrong. It's just that it was so constant. And, you sort of puke on them in this frustration. And the revelation that came to me raising him was, Cynthia, your frustration is actually turning as shame. That's how he's feeling. And I was like, oh, no, why? You don't want that. You would never and that's why I think parents they feel like they carry that shame, or they feel like they carry that guilt, because it's like, well, we're not supposed to do all these things. We shouldn't, again, there's those words. When in actual fact, we are really just putting our best foot forward. That's what we know. And so absolutely canceling any shame that anybody is feeling right at this moment.
I love that. And I think, and the question I was going to ask too was kind of geared in the same direction. When we are looking at our parenting and adjusting as they grow, what is a suggestion maybe you have on if it's a choice for us every day? Mm-hmm. How do we as parents break that? What's your suggestion on how parents can break that cycle of projecting that onto their children? Because I guess I kind of feel like our trauma that we grow up in, because it's different for everybody, right? Someone can be traumatized by something and someone else in the same house, it doesn't affect them at all, right? And so we have our own trauma that we bring into parenthood around parenting. Mm-hmm. And so what is something parents can do right now if they're thinking, oh, maybe I am projecting that on, and maybe I wasn't even aware that it was a thing. What can I do to help myself so I can choose to, one, not be offended by them, and two, start to shift that cycle in being supportive to their growth as opposed to attempting to control the situation?
If you can think as a parent, and maybe this specific example applies more to a mom standing at the kitchen sink doing dishes, and you're in your own thoughts. You could be as far back into your childhood thinking about something that has happened. You could be as close as what happened on the phone call that you just got off 10 minutes earlier. You could be thinking about an old boyfriend that, something didn't go right, and you're processing through it. And I've heard that you're always the same age as you ever were. So you might be 30 years old, standing at that sink, doing the dishes right in that moment. And these are your thoughts. You're somewhere else. You are in that kitchen physically, but your thoughts are you're present somewhere else. Your child comes up to you, bites your leg, hits you, or they're running away from, whatever. And what happens? And out comes a fireball. What is that fireball? So take that note, and then I'll explain this one also. There is some trauma in my history also, the same as anyone else. And we were driving, I was driving my minivan with my two boys in the back. They were quite young at the time. Sunny day, weather's great. I am zoned completely somewhere. I actually didn't even remember what I was really even thinking of when a full-out war broke out in the back seat. One kid's bleeding, he's screaming, and the other kid is trying to fix it. I could have had an accident that day. The rage that erupted and spilled out, I am slamming on the brakes, sliding on the rocks in the gravel to get to the side of the road. It's out in the Tules, so there's no, it's a country highway, so there's no other vehicles, but even still, I get out, I rip open that sliding door. I am this close to the oldest child's face, and I screamed at him. Not profanities. I've never sworn at my kids. I didn't call him any names or anything, but I'm like, what do you think you're doing? Why would you hurt your brother? And he's like, he didn't even do it on purpose, but I didn't know that until later. I didn't give him any time. I just lost it. And the other kid was like, oh my goodness, mom was mad. So he settled down and he bit his lip and held his finger, and I slammed the door shut. I got into the front seat and I'm powerhousing home. And inside of me, I felt like the Holy Spirit said, Cynthia, you're not mad at your kids. You're mad at your dad. And I'm like, no, that did not just happen. That's not okay. And that beautiful, gentle conviction, just like, oh, I get goosebumps even thinking about it, because it was just one of my worst moments as a mom. And we got home and my son, like, that was still a half-hour drive, and my son was still crying. And here's where the human part comes in. We make those mistakes. You've done them, Dina. I am just admitting to it. And there's other people out there hearing this very same thing and going, OMG, yep, I've done that. And I sat with him and said, what happened back there actually had nothing to do with you. That was totally uncalled for. And I told him exactly what happened. I said, I can't take this back, but I do want to ask for your forgiveness. I mean, they're tiny, right? Like they're just little, but they still need to see us as full human beings. And he's like, okay. And I've asked him now, he's nearly 19, but I've asked him now, I'm like, do you remember that? And he's like, vaguely. But I pulled the quill out because I shot the quill. So then it's my responsibility to take it back. And that's, I think, what we just have to realize. Like, some of those traumatic things, they weren't my fault, but now I'm responsible for that heart that is carrying the quills from somebody else. I can't ask that person to come and start pulling out those. That's now my responsibility as an adult. For my child, if that quill is from me, I'm responsible for that. It could have been tinier than that even, but to me, that was like a log that I just shoved into my child. And at 16 years old, not understanding exactly how a teenage boy communicates, and feeling like I am a teenage girl myself, dealing with a teenage boy in my house, feeling like I am just right back when I was in high school. So I don't know if any of you can relate to that, because that's really, I'm like, oh my goodness, that stung. And I feel like I'm also in high school. But from something he said, I had to go down to his bedroom and say, you know what? I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I have never parented a 16-year-old boy before. And guess what? You've never been 16 years old before, so you have no idea what you're doing. So if you can give me any pointers on how to hear you better, please let me know, because I am all ears. There's nothing perfect that's going to come out of me, but we are going to do the best we can. And so I don't know if that's a full, complete answer. It's more just examples, but maybe it'll just awaken something inside of somebody, and they're like, okay, I totally get that. It's literally just admitting and being human the whole time, while creating a safe place that you have facilitated. Because the world out there is mean and nasty. We literally need to be the stake that holds them up straight for as many years as possible, because then they grow strong. And so then when you let go, which that's the next stage that I'm walking into, is letting go. That's really hard. There's a lot of tears.
One. I have a tip for you.
Wow, so good. But yeah, I think that like what we even talked about in the very beginning, it's like you have to offer them strength and you have to offer them truth, but it's truth based on like who you see them to be. Not truth about what they're doing wrong. It's actually focusing more on like, who are you? What is the beauty that you behold? Even as like, if it's a boy, I still think of them as being so beautiful on the inside. Because one son, he comes and helps me with the groceries before I drive up, and he's out there unpacking. The next son didn't even open the door for me when I walk, he'll go before me and the door slams. And do I knock him for that? Maybe socially he just isn't quite there yet. And it's literally walking, like letting them walk in grace, like offering so much to them. I think that's strength in its own in its own way rather than calling them out on everything. Because we all know how that felt when our parents did that to us.
I just want to thank you for being here because this was such an amazing conversation. I greatly appreciate you sharing your story.
Thanks, Tina.
For those of you listening and watching, whichever you're doing, I just want to let you know Cynthia has given us something to learn from in the comments or in the description. So she has something you can go to. It's called How to Survive Your Child's Severe Meltdowns Without Burning Out. So take a moment. And if anything in this conversation aligned with you, with Cynthia, that you're like, oh my gosh, I really struggle with that. I haven't been able to figure out how to do this. You're going through any of this, get connected. Her links will be below. You can get her free offer, get into her world and start connecting and learning and gaining support and gaining insight and helping you walk this journey so that because, we should never do this alone. And we don't always have someone in our circle that we can have as a sounding board that can understand or that will offer us the type of support that we're looking for. So go ahead and click on any of those links. And thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gina. It was great. I was so looking forward to it.
Good. So I wanted to tell you, because this is a challenge for me, is the letting go.
Oh.
And so if you think about back when they learned to tie their shoes and they didn't want your help anymore, when they learned to eat on their own and you didn't need to cut up their food anymore, when they learned to get dressed, they learned to bathe, they learned to do all these things. And so you've been letting go all this time. And so what's the one thing that you're letting go of when they take over? Do you know?
For so long, they needed me to speak for them. They held back and, even to order food, even up until a couple of years ago, they both socially really struggled with that. And not very long ago, my son was going out with his friends and they picked up some food and came home. And I had said to the one cousin that was with him, if I owe you anything, let me know. And my son turned around and said, do you think I can't pay my own way? And I was like, that hurt. Ow. Ow. And I was like, oh my goodness, no. He had never paid for anything before. He'd never taken his debit card to pay. So I was so surprised. And maybe it wasn't even his debit card. It could have been cash out of his wallet because he saves his money. So he's got cash. And all of a sudden I realized, I was like, he just took his voice. He just took a voice that was inside of him that he found, and he is loving it. And he's got his own money, and he's like, oh, I'm going to take responsibility for that. So that recently has been.
That's the big key, is letting go of the feeling responsible for the outcome.
Oh, dang. Oh, so many parents. I see like adult children struggling still with their parents over this. They don't let them go. They don't let them do their own responsible thing. And I'm like, I have to learn how to do this, and I want to learn how to do it well.
And the hard part of that is when you see them struggling, make a mistake, alarm doesn't go off, they aren't doing the things they should be doing to take care of themselves the way that you taught them.
Yes.
And so it can be very difficult to step back and let it be. Let them deal with it. Let them be responsible. Let them hold that responsibility and be like,
yes,
I'm out. I taught you.
Do you know?
You're on.
Totally. Because if they don't, how do they ever learn what a consequence feels like? And if you don't ever feel a consequence, do you ever really learn how to take full responsibility? I don't think that you do, because it's not that you want to throw them out there into the world and be like, it's going to sting, go get it. Like, we're going to make it sting here so you know how it stings out there. It's not that, but you're right. It's that natural, if you're late, and you have to deal with it.
And it's just being reminded that when when our kids need us, they will ask.
Yeah.
Or if there are things put in place that says, hey, if this is what's going on, I'm struggling asking for myself. I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with that. So that we know the signs to look for, so we can speak up and say, hey, we've been noticing this. Do you need some support? I know this can be challenging for you. Do you want to talk about, like, there is a way to step into that and ask to offer support and help, and for them to say yes or no, and give them the ability to be responsible for their life, because the longer that responsibility is held from them,
yes,
the more tension, the longer the tension will stay in that relationship. And they will need to feel like they're children, and they won't ever feel like adults.
And that's a tragedy, really, because we often think it's like, well, I'm going to raise my kids and I'm going to raise my kids, and, they're going to be kids. And no, actually, they're not kids for very long. Not really.
No, they're not.
Because they start to do adult things at 15, 16 years old already,
or younger.
Or practicing. Yes, they're practicing, on how to be responsible, or how to take over some things, because they don't want somebody to, like, get out of my face, leave me alone, do my thing.
Yeah, I'm very much an enabler. I know that about myself. When you live 5 minutes from the school or 10 minutes from the school, and you get the messages, I left this, I forgot this, I didn't do that. Okay, I'll bring it, I'll do it. And you think you're going to do it just a couple times, and then you find 2 years later, you're still doing it for all 4 or 5 kids, or, however many. And you're like, well, I can't really stop now. I don't know how, and it's really hard, but it's so important to be aware. And when you have that awareness, to start having the tough conversations around, what, I know I do this as a parent. This is something I have to stop doing, so you can take responsibility, because that's you. And I'm taking that opportunity away from you to choose for yourself how you want this to go.
That's right.
I'm taking away the opportunity for you to choose how to handle that tough situation.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that my kids are willing to share those things with me.
Yeah.
They're like, this is not okay. Like, well, tell me what else to do then. Because until you tell me another way, I'm trying all the things I can think.
I know. I said that to my boys too. I'm like, if I don't say this, I am going to feel like I didn't take care of you. So I'm going to say it, but then I'm going to remind you that I'm only doing it because I want to take care of you. So you can just leave it and just humor me that I just love you.
Right? I'm going to tell you what I think because I care about you and I love you. And you can say, I appreciate the suggestion, and take it or leave it, right?
Exactly. I know.
Let them go with that.
That's so good. Yeah. Yeah. But they're beautiful. They're beautiful growing, as they grow up. And the things that they get interested in. And I would like to smother them even with that, because I'm like, tell me about your life. I want to hear. And they're like, I don't want to talk to my mom. And so I have to back off a little bit and be like, hey, good morning, and not dive in too deep with any kind of emotional conversation, because they're like, yeah, no, not in the mood for that.
Right. That is so hard, especially with boys.
Well, yeah.
With the boys, I'm like, do you know how to converse? Like, yeah, hey, no response for weeks. I'm like, argue with lies.
So
I haven't heard anything, so I'm assuming everything is good, because no news is good news, right? I had a lot of practice with that when my son was in the military.
oh my gosh.
Because it's like, he and I were not in a good place when he left. In fact, I'm surprised we ever talked again after that. He had no desire at all
Wow.
to have anything to do with me when he left, which and I completely get it. It was so bad at that point. He and I were just, and I was just I was the one having the meltdowns. I didn't even have to teach kids how to deal with their parents' meltdowns, because I just,
next podcast.
I was like, I'm just a hot mess, the poor thing. But yeah, like, so we didn't have communication. He was 18. He's gone. He's up and out. And now it's, how do we figure out a relationship over 10 years when you're in the military, traveling the world?
Right.
And serving your country.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I just want my kids to be happy with or without me in your life, because for me, I'm that parent that I want you to live your life for you, not for what you think will make me happy.
Oh, totally.
Right. And I think that's such an important thing for our kids. And I don't think we tell them enough, or I don't think enough parents truly want that. They want their kids to do what they want them to do to make them feel better, because then to them, that means I didn't fail. When in actuality, it doesn't, them not being who or what you wanted them to be doesn't mean you're failing. It's letting them go and letting them become who God created them to be. Let them be their person, and you love them and you give them grace and you accept them as they are, and you just go.
Yep. And that ties exactly back to those moments where, when our youngest's behavior was like, oh my goodness, we don't even know what to do with this. And I mean, he didn't know what was going on either. But sitting in that place of, you know what? This doesn't actually change how I feel about you.
Mm-hmm.
You can do whatever, and I am not going to move. And you don't actually necessarily believe that about yourself in the moment. You're like, I'm kind of shaking here. I'm wavering. I don't know. And then it's just being honest about that I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I'm going to decide this again. And even for you, it's like, I don't know where this relationship is going to be with your son. However, how I stand in my desire to connect with him and be open to that relationship and, work through that never changes.
Yeah.
And they do. Has he steered back to some degree?
He actually just got out of the military, so we're figuring things out.
Just.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Wow. That's so
yeah, he's reacclimating right now, and it's a lot for someone to shift. You think about going from your parents' home to a place that you think is going to support you in the direction you believe it's going to take you. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come home and you're just like, hey, now there's no one, not that there's no one, but it's just very different. And so I don't know what that's like for him. I would never be able to speak to that experience with everything that he's gone through in his life. There's absolutely no way. Yeah. And I mean, we do talk. He comes and visits, we see each other and everything, and that's fine. It's just, I'm that person that I want to dive deep into relationship with my children. And my children are like, can we just not even scratch the surface? Can we just float right above it and just stay there? Because I don't want to hear what you have to say about anything in my life.
No, I know. Funny, not funny.
Yeah.
Because
it's really hard.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you think back to when you were that age and when you were leaving and what you didn't want your parents to have anything to do with. And, it's just, we all go through it.
Yep. And they need us to believe in them. Really.
Yeah.
Like, I totally know that you can do this. I know you have what it takes.
Yep. One of our sons, I've always been that way. I believe you can do whatever you put your mind to.
Yep.
And I made a choice in his life when he was 12. And I learned years later that choice told him he could never trust me because it made him believe that I didn't really believe that he could do whatever he put his mind to. So the trajectory that one decision put him on was the most disruptive thing in his world.
Wow.
And it really framed the trajectory. And when he sat and told me that, I was like, first of all, I think that's so brave to share with your mother.
Absolutely.
You
Good
kind
for
of messed up my
him.
life
Oh my
because you
gosh.
made that decision.
Yeah.
But that was his perspective. And I think we take out the understanding that our intention does not frame their perspective.
Right.
And that was a very hard lesson for me to learn. I will ask my kids, like, just be honest and tell me.
Yeah.
Because I'm that person that I want to always make myself better. Yet the problem was, I was like, well, if I fix this and did what you wanted me to do, shouldn't we be okay? And so my reasoning, because I was still in a very broken place, I was still struggling as a person to grow out of being a teenager when I had my first child, growing through that.
Yeah.
To now having and wanting to realize I want my kids to have a voice.
Yeah.
Yet I didn't know how to make sure that happened.
Yeah.
And so, although I would say I want you to have a voice, the actions didn't always happen that way. And, so it is like we have a huge impact on the way our children perceive things, the way they perceive the world, the way they make their choices. And we have to not take offense to that. And that is a very hard thing to do.
It is a very hard thing to do because what I want to do now is do all the things right so that they don't experience any of that later.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way to know any of those things.
No.
Zero. And like we talk about even letting our kids go, it's laying those things down. I actually am probably going to mess up in this area or this area or this area. And I don't even know if we have to be okay with that is really the right phrase. I think it's just inevitable that it's going to show itself somewhere.
Yeah.
Because I can only pass on what I've conquered. I mean, I will pass on other things too, but I mean, I'm talking about the positive and the good stuff.
Yeah.
That's going to be what I've conquered. And then some of the trauma may slip through and I won't be aware of it.
And we can only do what we can do with where we are and what we know and what we're aware of. And then we just have to have grace with ourselves.
Absolutely. Because if I look at my parents or my husband's parents, they have both said, oh my goodness, we grew up in a different time and a different culture. If I would have had the freedoms you had, I wish I would have been able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't an option. And I'm like, oh, okay. So there's a lot of grace I have to give them because maybe they were stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's something I couldn't see and perceive as a child.
Yeah.
I didn't like how it came across and maybe still don't.
Right.
But it's like, oh, you couldn't actually have done anything differently. There really was no other place for you to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you for hanging out with me and spending this time with me and having this conversation. I think it was just incredible and very impactful for so many people.
That's so good. So good. So, yeah, let me know when it airs. I'm here.